thought that was gonna go on forever.
Yeah, I know. It's just like da, 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 forever. It just never stops. Whole series.
Top right, as the blue Protoss, we have Drogo. That one kind of like tapered off, like I could see where that was kind of coming. The other one
Yeah.
though, I was like, ooh,
The
how
other
many
one was
beats are
just
gonna
zero
be?
chill. It was going forever, basically.
Basically, yes, yes, indeed. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're excited, Wardy, as there's been a lot of the controversy around PVZ, and let's just say that a particular match happening 6 hours ago about
Hmm.
did not necessarily help those conversations.
Yeah, I mean, it's a matchup I don't want to talk about in that way as EG because no matter what you say, you can't please everybody, right? The Zergs win, they still want you to think it's broken. Protoss win, it's still broken in that regard. It is a weird matchup though, right? Because I feel like there's definitely strategies on either side that seem very, very strong, very powerful, right? And a lot of the matchup comes down to, does a Moonwalk work? Does the Protoss get that defense up? And that's not always what, a lot of players like to play around, but that is just the state of the matchup right now. I think it can still be a very fun matchup though, as long as you don't go past the 45-minute mark generally.
Yeah. I mean, to a nod of the GSO finals, no spoilers, guys, but the game one of it was actually very good. It was very back and forth, and, it was, I think, utilized a lot of the fun elements of Protoss versus Zerg, which, it's not just that they want to have more fun. It actually has a little bit more oomph on a lot of these maps, a little more firepower to actually be trying to hit with some Immortal pushes, some Blink Soccer pushes. Lurkers sometimes are that nice bridge to the late game if it does get there. So definitely a lot of exciting things could happen. But at the end of the day, there is always that conversation about is it really the best thing to go Void Rays? And then for the Zerg, the best thing to go for the Queen Walk, which on Jagannata, I mean, we really do have to keep this in mind because that might be exactly the setup that we see.
Yes, no, it's a very good map for it. It's a great map to play Void Rays on because, hey, you can get into a lot of them. You can get to 4 bases somewhat easily, right? It's an easily defendable 4 base generally. But it's also a map with those acceleration zones that the Queens walk across very quickly too. So they move over to the other side very quick, and that's obviously where the problem arises for the Protoss players having to set up that defense. So we will see exactly what both players choose. I mean, I'm especially expecting Denver to pull out something Queen Walk at some point in the series. It doesn't have to be game 1, right? But a Queen Walk is just almost like a guarantee at this point, or some kind of roach timing, some sort of heavy pressure. As these Adepts shade in, and they're going to get a couple of drones to begin with. 3 workers going down. That's already a very good start for just the 2 Adepts getting it.
Would have been lovely to get that 4th, but not quite able to as I went back in the gas geyser. Yeah, not a bad start. Denver's going to actually just continue to drone up. He sees the Void Ray. I mean, big surprise, right? But honestly, it can be. We have still our Twilight Council openers. We still have some Oracle-only openers, but that is now the question for Denver is what the heck is following up this Void Ray, which is denying him all this information.
Yep. Yeah, it's really tough. And that's obviously one of the most frustrating things to play against in this matchup, right? It's like, well, what is actually going on? And it's one of the things the Zergs definitely complain about, right? Like, you can open Void Ray and deny so much information. And then it really is a question of, well, what actually is happening? What am I up against? And if you make the wrong call, if you don't prep for Void Rays and they go ground, and this Void Rays, you're in trouble. If they go for ground army and you're building too many queens, you're in trouble. It's what makes the matchup difficult for the Zerg. How do you figure out? You've got to look at all those subtle signs and figure out what isn't there at those certain times and stuff as well. And that obviously opens the door for a lot of mind games too.
Yeah, small details matter.
Yeah,
exactly. They do. That is the job of Denver right now is kind of figure that one out. I mean, the anticipation of seeing more Void Rays. That's what these Lings are trying to check out right now. What's being warped in? Are there more Void Rays already? I mean, as far as the 3rd base timing goes, that's a nice information too. But you can even try and see what the Cybernetics Corps is doing on the front lines, which I believe is exactly the role of this Ling. It's actually going to stay still and just check out what's popping out from that side of the map. But anyways, it is actually a 2nd Stargate, and it is going to be double Void Ray for a while here. Denver currently at 5 queens. That is going to be, it's going to be a bit small in the number if he stays there, because that's awkward. But I don't think he will. It does make me a bit. I just feel like I see nonstop queens, nowadays. Wardy, I'm always anticipating that queen walk, but staying at 5, that's almost a respectable Zergover.
Yeah, that's nothing out of the ordinary, right? It's like, oh yeah, I'm just playing any matchup. Maybe apart from ZVZ sometimes. Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that one. We see one more, two more now starting up, so we're getting there slowly.
Okay.
I mean, Drogo was also fairly quick to charge this game too, right? So he's not being perfectly kind of only chrono boosting out Void Rays. There's a gap in production here and there. And it might just be that he settles down on a lower number, in which case not going to as many queens right away is also not such a bad thing, because those Zealots are going to create a threat on the ground, and a threat that is a very real threat, one you have to really pay attention to. And if you don't, if you let that kind of slip away and Zealots overwhelm you, this game ends really quickly.
Okay, he has seen that the 7x core is moving. I was a little worried there. But yeah, so I think, he's also seen now a numerous amount of Void Rays. Went up to 7 queens, now adding on an 8th. That's exactly the number I was thinking would make me feel nice and safe wrapped in a safety blanket. Because that Void Ray harassment, that's actually, I feel like, what started this whole Void Ray movement back when it got buffed and people were like, oh god, like what's going to happen here? And we had, people using these like 6 or 8 Void Rays to even poke around. And we had some more like aggressive to the face pushes with the Void Rays. And you do need a certain number of queens to kind of bridge that gap in an economic way between, the early game, want to get my drones, and the later game, want to bust out all the Hydras and actually attacking this guy, which, Denver's, planning on later game. He's actually getting into Infestors here, so Microbial Shroud, I'm feeling it.
Yeah, it's kind of it has been a better way to play almost lately. Like, we've seen it actually be kind of good in certain scenarios. Queens, when carriers are fighting them and there's a Microbial Shroud on them, like, carriers just don't do damage. Of course, this game, we're not rushing up to carriers or anything, right? It has been a bit more focused on the ground after the startup, and that's one of those things why, now these Infestors, what do they really achieve? Like, can they lock down the Zealots a bit, or these Void Rays still? Sure, they can. But is that what you really want to go to, like, at this stage of the game? To me, that feels a little bit early for what Drogo's investing in. It all comes down to how well Drogo's initial attack does, and we'll see when he attacks just how well that turns out, basically. So that's what we're kind of waiting on. Because Disruptors are coming through, and yes, they are defensive at first, but there's no reason that they have to stay at home if he realizes that Denver ain't doing anything aggressive.
And I guess that is a question for us, the audience. Like, how much has Drogo really read into this? He saw the hive, so I'm going to say a lot. That is actually pretty much the most important information right now. So he could try and hit, an attack, especially before Vipers are ready to go. But is that necessarily, is he quite set up to do that? Perhaps not, right? He is getting up to 4 bases, a lot of probes, still working on his upgrades, and now even grabbing 2 additional robos. And then to get into Blink, at almost 9 minutes. But and really working on that ground army. So Microbial Shroud actually will not really be playing a part here, mostly because it's not really about the Protoss Air.
Yeah, and then now Neural Parasites on the way. Is Denver just like full on misreading, or do you think there's still something you can do with Neural Parasites in this situation? Is it just worth it because he has the Infestors anyway? Because it really isn't the normal go-to at this stage.
That is a good question. I'm not sure. I'm excited for the possibilities, and I'd love to think, that Denver is coming through here, and even if he was like, oh no, oh shoot, like I misread that, because he did just see like a big ground army, so if he was misreading it, he should be correcting himself here. That he would be like, okay, well, here's the other thing I could do. Maybe I can actually Neural Parasite some of these Archons, or even get behind and do something to the Disruptors, which would be super cool, but is also super not done. So I want to give Denver credit, but I am also a little bit worried that he's just kind of read this as straight to air, and now might have support units, these Infestors, that don't add enough to the main fight.
We'll see. So much of this just comes down to what happens in the fight, right? And it's like, yeah, if the Maze and Neurals go off and he blows the entire Protoss army up with his own Disruptor or something, we're going to start screaming and shouting. It's going to be a great time. But it's also very possible that they Neural like a couple Archons, they get overrun anyway because there's nothing to keep the Zealots off them. The Infestors die, the Neurals go off, and all of a sudden it's just this Protoss army against Roach Ravager. A few Banes mixed in too. It's so much about the position in this fight and whether those Infestors can maybe find something. Love these Voids still hanging around down the bottom. That's just going to go for this hatchery. New Spawn Crawler going to move into position to try and save it, but that hatchery is just going to go down. and those Void Rays are going to escape away. So already shutting down a pretty major point of economy for Denver, and Drogo just... It's funny because, you know, now we're just talking about how Denver's like almost preparing for mass air, and now he can't even really deal with the smaller amount of air on the map.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. You know, you should have... I mean, you would love to be able to take on these Void Rays, but they're not really going for a main attack. So as far as dealing with their harassment, that's back down to Spore Crawlers and Queens, which can be awfully slow, as seen there. Denver is going to trade out some of his units. He kind of already did. He had a couple of units poking forward. And this is very much so just preparing for a later game. He's actually adding on that Greater Spire, which is a fine solution to a ground-based army if you can get there fast enough, and enough Broodlords too. You know, 6 isn't really going to cut it if they can blink forward. But that's when Fungals come in, you know, the dance does happen. But, you know, every time I'm like, oh, I wonder if Denver's, you know, misreading this. Maybe he's getting a little too far ahead of himself. Drogo doesn't really push the issue anyways.
Yes.
You know, he's adding Fleet Beacon. Okay, he didn't really do anything. Then he added 3 Stargates, and it's like, well, he should be adding on these carries. But maybe, just maybe, you're going to have that push. Drogo is maxed out, still pumping out 3 Immortals at a time. And this is long before Broodlords are ready.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you. It's going to be my next point. Like, hey, you know, we discussed all these things. That Disruptor shot still gets the fire. So yeah, the Disruptor dies, but it still gets an Infestor. So yeah, we can point out all of these things, but if Drogo never punishes any of it, it doesn't really matter, right? So a lot of what we discussed doesn't really matter because Drogo never took advantage. And you were right, this was kind of still a time when he could hit before Broodlords, but now maybe the Infestors scare him off. He's like, wait a second, you got Infestors. Maybe he has to kind of consider, what do I really have to deal with Infestors? Well, you know, I guess my Disruptors can maybe hit them during a fight or so. It's a bit risky, and now Drogo having backed off and now maybe coming back across the map, now 9 Broodlords are going to be ready. Now it's a different situation, and we're playing a different game, so yeah. Is there a way to fight these Broodlords? Absolutely. But is it a little bit better for Denver than it was 2 minutes ago? Also, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. Drogo even saw this timing. He had an observer on the Corruptors and then on the actual making of the Broodlords, so... My guess is that he saw it back when he got, you know, that neural happen and was like, ooh, what if they make as I'm, you know, still walking across the map? Then he didn't see them make, so he walked back. Then he walked forward rather. Then he saw them actually made and was like, you know what, maybe my timing's up. It was a bit of an awkward dance mentally as he figures out now how to deal with this army, which, you know, he has the solution already. He already has multiple Stargates. He actually just needs to start trading out supply. He can't fill with anti-Broodlord army units until he trades out some of these Immortals, you know?
It's funny how this game's almost backwards, right? Like, it's, you know, Drogo now needs to deal with the air army, which is something which Denver over-prepared for early himself, and funny how that all works. Tempest on the way. I mean, loses the prison with some harassing units inside. That's unfortunate, of course. Our left side base is dead. We do see the right side trying to rebuild up. One thing I've got to say for Drogo is that he's never been in trouble this game, right? You know, he's never had to fight for bases. He's never had to fight to keep economy up and rolling. So he's had a very comfortable game in that regard. This is just a mass Immortal push because, well, why not, right? Because what else are you going to use Immortals for at this point? They're not really that good in the army because you don't need that much buffer on the ground versus just having more air units.
Yeah, if this was, you know, some other style of play with Ultras, then yeah, maybe keep some of those Immortals, but it really is just letting them all walk forward. Not really a great use of the Infestors again here. Like, that was just too small of an army to combat the Immortals, so they're actually taking down some expensive, important units and bases with them. Meanwhile, Drogo also attacking on the left side. Now, that's a bit bold. These are not exactly a cohesive set of units, but he is getting some distraction going, so these Immortals are going to take out yet another base if they focus fire. There we go. And they're still actually warding away these Queens.
Yep, those Queens kind of wanted to join in, and then they don't, and then they do, and they realize, this wasn't actually so pretty. Those Lings running in theory, should be great. Finally, a few of them get through all at once. The problem was they were just going in 1 or 2 at a time, so it wasn't working very well. So the Immortals will go down, but again, we expected this to be a trade-out. Voids are kind of fighting on their own. Disruptors are going to show up to a fight where there's nothing to disrupt. And this fight's kind of weird as well. I mean, the fights across the map are just kind of a little bit bonkers, Zombie Grove. Nothing's really kind of going the way it's meant to be going at the moment.
For either player, so we're seeing some missizing, misjudgment of these engagements from both of them. Overall, though, I mean, and going back to your point about how Drogo really hasn't been bothered in this game, I do like Drogo's positioning. maybe he missed some of those moments that could have really hit Denver a lot harder, but overall he's done a great job expanding and getting his production ready, getting a bank ready, still on 85 probes, so he's still mining a heck of a lot. And now he is finally adding on that storm, which I believe is very intentional disregard in the early game that could be helpful here. So, I like the way that he's playing this game, but Denver also on an army type that can survive these situations. You just got to be careful with it.
No, absolutely, as those Broods want to try and get forward. The problem is the Broods, every time they get a little bit further forward, there's a good reason for them to be backing away as well. And Denver is really just hard stuck on 4 bases now. These bottom bases just keep on getting denied. Obviously, he had the 5th base for a while, but he just can't expand. And the fact that Drogo was taking bases just so easily this game, something I mentioned earlier, it really does mean that Drogo's bank is just excellent. 5k, 4k versus Denver, who has, minimal amounts of gas banked up, a handful of minerals, and he's not even properly maxed yet. So we still have more work to be done there even. I mean, that's a big problem because it means you just cannot build off of a fight, which means you then have to overwhelm this fight. And I don't know if that's happening with only a 10 army supply advantage.
He realizes that his drone count, or rather his bank really, is not that impressive, so he adds on more drones. Eventually, if you're banking, as much as Drogo is, perhaps, you can get rid of some of your drones, but, you want to get there first, which Denver's not been able to do because there have been some insufficient trades. He has been denied plenty of hatcheries, and he was set down to a lower drone count pretty early on for what we would expect a Zerg player to be at if they just, jumped to this location. If they go up 0 to 17 minutes, we'd be like, oh, they were on 90 drones the entire time, right? Yep. No, unfortunately not for Denver.
Yep, it's been just a difficult game for him, and Drogo has looked rather comfortable throughout it. So that's my issue going into this late stage now, that Drogo has just gotten here way too easily, and typically that just almost always means that the Protoss is going to have a good time. We'll see. I mean, obviously, you still got to find the proper fight. It's still very possible. Denver takes an amazing fight, overwhelms, gets across the map, and kills Drogo before he gets a chance to rebuild. That will always be the weakness of Drogo's army. As long as Drogo trades somewhat decently, and he's got the army to do that, obviously, it should just be his game at this rate because Denver is in trouble, and Drogo's just comfortable enough to move with this army to deny Denver those new bases coming back up again.
Denver really wanted at least the bottom 2 bases this entire time, the bottom 2 right ones, and even that's been a struggle. So forget about kind of the middle 2 bases that are now vacant. Those are probably going to go to Drogo by the pacing of this game, but things could turn around. Denver starting to get a little bit more on the multitasking, has some units to the left, army through the middle of the map, and hopefully it doesn't cross paths unwillingly against the air army, or perhaps it is willingly. Grabs 1 carrier, yoinks another to bop it. I mean, hopefully. There you go. There you go. The Ultras not really doing a whole lot for that base. They were the distraction, though, that might have set up a few more picks for those Corruptors. Not exactly a brilliant 1-2 punch, but I think I like the idea, right?
Yeah, I like the idea of what Denver's setting up for in general and everything, but and right now I'm not seeing a way, and it just doesn't get better at any point. Suddenly Zealot's bottom right, this base is just yet to mine. The fact that he's struggling to get to these bases is just, a real sign of what's to come. I'm going to stand by that as Drogo sits around here. He wants to fight. He doesn't want to run into it too quickly or anything, of course. That's fine. He's the player who's doing things around the map to give him the time to pick the fight that he wants at the perfect moment.
We'll mention that Denver's done a great job upgrading. He's on his way to 3-3 for his air, where Drogo is only finishing his +3 attack. He doesn't have any armor here. He's also been, fairly Void Ray light for most of the... I'd say even most of the game, even though we started off with Void Rays. So the Corruptor count is pretty scary. They're not getting punished as much as they could be. So he's also rectifying that problem. So again, Denver could maybe take this really brilliant fight, but it's getting less and less likely. It's also getting less and less likely that he'll take such a brilliant fight that he'll recover from everything that's happened so far.
That's the problem. It's not like he needs a good fight. He needs a fight that you just don't really see very often in the ZVP. And that's, again, just because of everything else that's happened. And it's been now 20 minutes of just Drogo being in the better positions. This is cute, right? The idea of these Corruptors diving around, caustic spraying. It's the right idea because you need to do something to start getting back in this game. But then he never actually committed to it. So he backs away from that. Yeah, it's risky because maybe those Corruptors get caught, you lose them, and then game ends. But at the same time, he's not in the position to be like, oh, that's risky, I can't do it. He's in the position where he needs to take some risks. Because if he doesn't, again, it's Drogo that's just getting into better and better spots. It's not costing Drogo very much to keep on denying those bases of Denver. Drogo is trading better, so Denver needs those bases. And, well, again, Drogo just has the better army, the better bank as it stands. Well, just to the top side, as they will take down the cannon eventually. Those Vanes are going to find some mega value on the stack defense. And that's great. Maybe can get through to some probes here in the end with these ultras, but of course now the voids come over. And while this is happening, this is just a moment where I really wish there was something else going on the right side. But what is Denver meant to do on the right side? Well, apparently not much. And that's the problem. If he hits the right side too, brilliant. But what did he do here? Traded out some units for stacked defense? It ain't changing the game.
Yeah, I think we can just say that Denver was afraid that Drogo would take that defense and then pounce off of it to kill him. So that's why I moved back. But it is unfortunate because Drogo actually just sat back, you know, which has been a trend. And Denver, had he taken maybe 20 more seconds, he was awfully close to the right side base to begin with. He probably would have at least gotten a cancel, at least something. But it does feel like, you know, both of them are perhaps a bit shy to take these main engagements, rightfully so. But Drogo's doing everything else around the engagement to really set him up for success. Denver is playing a bit of catch-up. This is going to be awkward. He's got Infestors and Broodlords. Well, his Corruptors, Vipers, and Queens are elsewhere. And he's just got to get out of there. He's got to give up trying to attack into that army. And he has to give up his base, too. Scorpio is only going to last so long. Drogo's probably like, where the heck is the rest of the army? Should I get out of here? A couple of Fungals go down. Actually, the High Templars, most of them taken out before the air army of Denver got around, and that is a scary position for the Protoss. So I do think backing away and waiting for more is the right option.
Yeah, Storms obviously do so much here, just weakening up those Corruptors. It makes sense to sit back and wait for Storms to be available once again. So yeah, I mean, that gives Denver some time. Drogo is not able to push in as he wanted to. I mean, we finally have Denver properly stabilizing on these bases, right? So he's able to properly build up a bank. Something we've not really seen this game, and that is some credit to him. You know, he sat through all of these frustrating moments, these frustrating things that were happening that he couldn't do much about, and he's finally been able to say, right, cool, I've survived what should be one of the worst parts of the game for me, and while it maybe still isn't looking bright ahead, it's definitely brighter than it was, a few minutes ago. So his patience paying off. Drogo maybe not having the killer instinct to take advantage of this as well, and like you say, kind of a trend in this game that Drogo's just being fairly passive. He is just believing that if anyone needs to fight, it's Denver, and if Denver wants to fight, then it's going to be on Drogo's side of the map with Drogo's stack defense. And Drogo says, other than that, I am just going to take one of your bases even on the bottom left. And that's why Drogo isn't attacking, because he's comfortable enough to do stuff like that.
Yeah, if you're comfortable, the aggressor is the one that's always going to be in a bit of a worse situation. If the aggressor is able to find an opening by being aggressive, then yes, that's why being aggressive can be really great in StarCraft. But we're really just waiting. Like, both of them acknowledge that a fight is on the way. Like, the opportunity to find 3 carries out in the middle of nowhere is awfully low. So as long as Drogo knows that he is in the comfortable position, that Denver is looking for those pickoffs, yeah, defensively should always be in the better spot, more well prepared, and just literally with some stack defense on his side. I love that Denver's trying to do some shark attacks with Infestors, but is that ever going to work? How many observers are we talking about? Actually, only 1. The revelation on the Oracle from Denver would have been a nice touch, but I don't think he actually... Yeah, he didn't even keep the Oracle.
Yeah, here we go, a little mothership yoink, but it doesn't even get taken down. The Sports will do what they can, but the Corruptors just don't want to join the fight, and Drogo says, well, now is the time, let's keep on going. Mothership does finally go down. The first Storms are dropping, honestly didn't do that much. Big fungal growth. The question is, can these Corruptors take down this air army in time? They're starting to work their way through those carriers. There's nothing left on the ground, so the Broodlords are kind of dead weight in this fight all of a sudden. Again, just carriers. Can they go down soon enough? Will there be anything left after? Stalker showing up. Well, now the Broodlords can maybe join in again, but he's just going to dive headfirst onto those Broodlords. He ain't going to let those get away at all. 21 new Corruptors on the way. That sounds great and all to maybe clean up this air army, but suddenly ground reinforcements might be an issue, and there are 7 Void Rays buildings, so the Corruptors aren't going to be completely unanswered, as DT say, no, this Ultra gets locked in.
Yeah, the Ultra's not finding as much success as they were hoping for, plus it wasn't even really that important of a base, just in the production, really. So the Corruptors, if they could clean up all of this air army and resets, then we give a chance to Denver, but can they actually do that? The Stalkers are still here. The Ultra numbers really aren't that high. It is 19 Corruptors with some great upgrades against no Void Rays. But that's a lot of firepower still from all those interceptors. Again, the Stalkers help out. Here come the Void Rays, and they are a bit necessary. It didn't really matter at the end. 60 supply difference. Drogo with the bigger bank. Used it up, then had another bank beyond that. I mean, the fight could have gone better in a lot of ways for Denver, but the whole game itself, I think, was just a nod to Drogo being the better player. Like, he just overall looked better. Not perfect, but better.
The only thing I can really comment on for Drogo, though, is just it was so passive, right? And
Yeah.
I feel like this works against Denver because Denver also felt like he put himself behind. He didn't do things in the order we expected him to, us having perfect vision and him maybe not. And that was obviously a problem. So Drogo could just sit back and not do much. But I do feel like that's not something that can be successful permanently for Drogo. So maybe he was just playing to the way this game played out, and that's fine. But it's important that if Denver has a better start and a better setup next time, that he maybe does look to take the advantages that he gets given, right? So that's the only thing I'd say. We go on to Oxide, which immediately should bring us a little bit of a different game here. It can still be Void Rays, it can still be Sky units, but it's maybe a little less likely to go directly into some of those later stage games with the Sky units as well. So we will see. I mean, maybe we see something similar from Drogo in the sense that last game wasn't so much about the Void Rays and just tacking up to air toss. It was about a few Void Rays and then saying, let's go into all of the other ground units, which we usually like to play early mid-game. So we will see, as Oxide is map number 2. Anything you expect now to Denver here, ZG, to mix it up a little bit?
Queen Walk.
Queen Walk, yeah. If those voids come out, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so tempting to do it when you're down a game. You thought you were playing as good of a game as possible. I mean, that's everyone thinks they're playing a good game as possible in StarCraft, or would hope to, anyways. And then still lose, and you realize there's even chances there. I think Denver, even with the insufficient scouting, perhaps, and we have the God Vision, they don't, still recognize like, oh, maybe if I'd done this or that or this or that. And it just is a very frustrating way to lose going into game 2. We'll see if there's a mentality has been broken, if he is going to rely on something that is maybe overused like a Queen Walk, or just play once again to his macro strengths. The bottom left, he is Denver.
In the top right-hand side, our Blue Pro display is Petit Drogo.
I don't know. Denver, to me, is a type of guy just is really, shoot, like I'm just going to try and get this victory with a Queen Walk. Because it is powerful, and it does kind of let the momentum reset. But is Oxide the map that Drogo is going to even do something that would be susceptible to that? That is the question, because Drogo did play a very safe style. The Void Rays in the beginning into the Disruptors, kind of acknowledging the possibility of a mid-game attack or any early game attack too. It's still pretty safe against that. And then playing it nice and calm in the late game. As overall, it was, I think, a very smart play from Drogo, and he would be proud of the way he played it. It was just the fact that we saw that there was a couple of moments that he could have had more of a killer instinct, right? But otherwise, Drogo really played a prime meta topical PvZ.
I mean, you really can't complain about how he played when at the end of the day he ended up taking Denver's bases, right? Denver was a 4 or 5 base Zerg when he should have been a 6 or 7 base Zerg for a long, long time. So you can't complain how Drogo played, right? If that's the case, he's really just denying Denver any bases. There was never really the massive need for him to go and fight. And we obviously knew that as well. It was just almost felt there was also no need to necessarily have to play such a long game. Which it's kind of weird to think about, but yeah, it's I can't complain about Drogo just taking this time there and saying, well, maybe one of the only ways I do screw this up is if I really just go overboard and get a little bit too excited, try and dive into a fight I can't win. We've seen plenty of players do that in the past.
And as much as we are talking about opportunities missed for Drogo, he was the one that pushed in to end that last game. So I didn't think that was going to be the case. We were talking about how he could just wait for Denver to tire out and throw his hands up in the air. But no, he saw an opportunity and he pushed it. So he is certainly capable of pushing the issue and thus also maybe over pushing it and making a mistake. But it's 20 minutes of that game was just nice, safe play. Again, we have an Adept going out for some scouting and a Stargate follow-up with Drogo.
Yep, so not really too much different just yet. We'll see what the initial 2 Adepts can do as the first one is here, second one not going to be too far behind it. That will be our setup for the moment as we get ourselves into this second round of action. A fun match so far. I definitely can imagine with Denver just having that bit of a better start. We talked a lot about how this could be a very even series, right? And then I can definitely see it, right? It just Denver needs to do things a little bit better early. He needs to not put himself behind almost and give Drogo the advantage straight away. That can happen. I'm kind of excited to see what might come through, to see if we can see some of that really cool back and forth PvZ we alluded to a little bit earlier as well.
We already have a bit of a difference. Denver doesn't lose any drones. Has to do a couple of cancels, but as far as the trade out here, it gets made up for by that second probe being lost. So, it's better. Denver does get supply blocked and pretty darn heavily, so that's not ideal. Grabs an Adept, has to get the heck out of there. I think that's actually some decent scouting, because an Overlord is also going back into the main base, hoping to see what the follow-up is. Sees another Oracle pop out, and nothing to kill it, so it just hangs around. You can see a second Stargate, you can see a Twilight Council, you can see a Robo, you can see this third Oracle.
If there's ever a time to Queen Walk for Denver, it's absolutely got to be this game, right? Triple Oracle is just generically weak against Queen Walks. There's a reason this phased out of the meta for a long time. Very few players really still bring this to the table. I'm intrigued by what Drogo does to make sure he is safe against something like a Queen Walk, because again, this build is just naturally not set up in time to defend most of those. As for the moment, tries to come through, honestly, as well, with the damage that he's getting done, which is not a lot, right? He's only killed one single drone here, Drogo. It really sets Denver up for a very powerful Queen Walk, where he's able to just get onto that good economy straight away, then just throw everything into Roach production.
I agree. Denver has done a great job holding on to everything he should as a player. It does require a couple of those cancels, so again, I guess maybe not 100% perfect, but he has canceled and kept his drones alive, made sure to have his third Spore Crawler in a place where there weren't any drones to kill, so it could be a little bit later. I love that Denver has his base, his feet under him, basically. And that does lend itself to a mid-game. Whatever mid-game he chooses to do. Right now, he is only grabbing a lair. No Baneling Nests, no Roach Warren, even for safety, recognizing what Drogo's plan was. Might be a little light in the Lings. No, a couple more show up, so the Adepts shade into the middle and aren't really going to be able to hit anything. Just kind of have to back away. Same with the Oracles. Queens were in position.
Yep. Yeah, defense has been really, really good from Denver, and it's exactly what he needs when Drogo's committing into this little bit more of an aggressive style, trying to find drones. It's one of the powerful parts of what Drogo is set up for here. And then you don't find it. Suddenly we're talking about Denver being off to a really good start in this game, going to be in a really solid position without much having necessarily happened. It's because not much has kind of come through from those attacks that Denver is in that good spot. As this Oracle dove into a weird place, it is going to go down. He got a drone, but obviously losing its life. That's kind of the power of 3 Oracles, at least, because now you've got yourself in this big position where you're able to say, right, well, I still have 2 left. I can still keep good map control. I can still defend well. But obviously, it just didn't really feel like that Oracle needed to die.
Not so much. As much as we talk about Denver, Drogo has done a wonderful job setting up back at home. While we've been watching all of the, potential fireworks with the Adepts and the Oracles. Back home, it was just a nice third base timing into Blink +1, almost like keeping up with Denver and even exceeding him on the income. Drogo's been a little bit ahead for a while here, so they both really have gotten to this stage without much to say about one way or another being ahead. And Denver has finally chosen, his composition, so we didn't need the Roach Warren early on, is still going to be going into Roach Hydra Lurker, which is very powerful, and also perhaps more mobility. I'm happy to see this, because I do think that Denver was kind of locked into this idea of, gotta deal with the Blood Race, gotta deal with the late game. And a more mid-game approach could be favorable, but that's also what Drogo's thinking. He is 100% going to be more aggressive than last game, because he's hitting with Blink in +1.
Yep, that fourth base is not something he's really thinking about using just yet. That's just a nice thing to have when he falls back from this. And obviously this time works well because the Lurkers are nowhere near being done. Lurker Den's only halfway through. Some Lings around the back, catching a few of those Storks on their own. The Oracles don't have a lot of energy. If they did, they would have been able to do a lot. But look at Drogo just blinking on top. Zero care in the world because he knows he can kill these Ravagers. There's just not enough units here to start this off for Denver, and Drogo is already getting this to just go massively in his favor. Now you've got the problem of as new Roaches spawn, they are just going to be caught off guard. A couple here, a couple there, right? None of them are going to be able to join up together. And that's just how the game ends.